Okay, this is Unit 6, Day 2 homework. So we're adding or subtracting fractions, which means we need common denominators. So I'm going to go through it in a couple different steps in a couple different videos. This video is going to just be finding the common denominators. So we're going to start off just each problem, not actually finishing it, but just finding common denominators. So let's look at number 1. So we're looking at denominators. That's the number on the bottom. 2x and 2x. So my least common denominator is already there for me, 2x. There's no work I need to do there. Number 2, 2d plus 1, 2d plus 1, they are the same. It's already a common denominator, and it is my least common denominator. So there's number 2. Number 3, x and x. Again, it is the same. It's already a common denominator. That's my least common denominator. Number 4, 2y plus 1, or 2y minus 1, 2y minus 1. Again, they're already the same. So make sure when you're doing these problems, if you already have a common denominator, don't change it. All right, so now let's look at the denominators here on number 5. So if I take a look, they both have x's. We definitely need x as part of our least common denominator. I can see here I have 2 y's, here I have 1. So I'm going to need to make sure I have the biggest amount, which is y squared. And then my last thing here is 4. So I basically got my common denominator by looking at both of the denominators and making sure I've included everything. So this is my least common denominator. Number 6, before I start, I'm going to factor this. So now when I look, if you have factors in parentheses, you need to look at that as an individual thing. Like here I highlighted each thing separately because they were all multiplied. But here, x plus 3, that's one thing. That needs to be part of my common denominator. X minus 3. That's a totally separate thing. That needs to be part of my common denominator. X plus 4, again, totally separate thing. They're all different things. They're all going to be part of my common denominator, and the combination of them all multiplied together is my least common denominator. Let's take a look at number 7. So first I'm going to take out a GCF here. So it's 2y plus 2. So I look at the 2. I need to include that in my least common denominator. I look at y plus 2. I need to include that as part of my common denominator. But when I get over here, look, I've already included y plus 2. I don't need to include it again. So in this case, this right here was my least common denominator. I've included everything. I don't want to include things more than one. So if you're coloring it and using highlighters, you just want to put one of each color. All right, so let's look at number 8. Again, I'm going to take out a GCF down here of 3. And over here I can take out a GCF of x. So now let's go through and figure out our least common denominator. So starting with this one, I have a 3. Definitely want that as part of my least common denominator. I have an x plus 3. Definitely want that. Over here I have an x. Definitely want that. But then I get back over here and look, it's the same again. I don't need to include it again. I've already included it. So my least common denominator is made up of everything, but no repeats. I don't want to repeat something I've already done. So let's look at number 9. Again, I'm going to factor this first. And over here I can pull out a 2 for GCF. All right, so let's look at our least common denominator here. X plus 3. Definitely needs to be part of it. Let's look at our next thing, x minus 3. Yep, that's different, needs to be part of it. Let's look over here, 2. Yep, needs to be part of it. But look, I'm back at x minus 3. I've already included it. I'm not going to include it again. So my least common denominator is the x plus 3, the x minus 3, and the 2. I don't want to write the x minus 3 again. I've already written it. All right, number 10. again, I'm going to factor first. This one turns out to be, so I'm factoring the denominators. I'm not rewriting the whole problem for purposes of keeping my space when I actually solve these problems later, but I am right now factoring all the denominators. So this turns out to be x minus 3, x plus 2, and this one over here factored is x plus 2 times x plus 2. So looking at my least common denominator, let's go through and make sure we have everything. X minus 3, yep, got it. X plus 2, got it. Now I move over here. Oh, look, I've already included x plus 2. So I'm not going to include it again. But this one's a little different because I have another x plus 2. So they go in pairs. So this one pairs up with this one, but even though this is still, I need to put another one down here because right now this side here has 2 x plus 2's and this one only has 1, and we have to be fair. Everything has to have the same. So if I have 2 x plus 2's here and only 1 here, I am going to need to include another one so that this one ends up with 2 x plus 2's. So again, we're being fair. We do it in pairs. We don't want to include something if we've already included it if it's a pair, but if it's on the other side and not a pair, then yes, we need to. I know it's a little bit confusing because up here we were saying, oh, we already have one, we don't want to include it again. But that's because this one has one and this one has one. It's fair. Same thing over here. We said, oh, it already has one, a number 8. We're not going to rewrite it. But that's because I have one here and I have one here. It's fair. They each have one. Same thing here on 9. This one has an x minus 3 and this one has an x minus 3. It's fair. So you need to make sure it's fair and they all have the same amount. So let's look at number 11. We're going to factor first. So x minus 2, x plus 1, and this one factors x minus 2, x minus 1. So our least common denominator. We need an x minus 2. We definitely need an x plus 1. Oh, there's another x minus 2. We're not going to include it because it matches up with this one. It's fair. I have 1 here and 1 here. I'm not going to write it again. And then I have an x minus 1. That is something different, so we do need to include it. So there's my least common denominator. So that's how to find the least common denominators on these problems. So again, reminder, if you already have a common denominator, you're not going to do anything to change that. You're going to use 2y minus 1 as your common denominator. They both have the same thing. When you're finding your least common denominator, make sure you have everything from both, unless it repeats in a pair. Like here, I have 1 here for this fraction, 1 here for that fraction. They match up. I don't need to write it twice. 1 for this fraction, 1 for this fraction. They match up. 1 for this, 1 for this. But here, number 10 is different because I have 1 that matches up with this one here, but then this one, this x plus 2 doesn't have a match, so we do need to have 2 of them.